I am not getting any gifts. So, and my parents moved to the Dominican Republic, so I'm not the way to let ladies to get my gifts. So, no, it's the best time of the year. So, but we're excited. Who's excited for tonight? We've been wanting to make this happen for like a year. You're a busy woman, so we're very grateful.
Thanks for being patient. I was like, they gonna curse me out. That did work, but how about 7 months from now? So they've been super patient. Also, this is my first time ever doing a live podcast. It's my first time ever doing an event in the salon. So I think
Yes. Our first time doing an event.
This was a sign of trauma. Now it's like a sign of like beauty as well. Whatever we're about to make together.
Baco wants to get his hair washed, apparently. I could definitely use a tratamiento. La punta. So yeah, it's so nice to have you. I mean, you are like, where in the world is Elizabeth Acevedo? It's all over the country, all over the world. You've been on tour. Are you grounded now for a few weeks? Or are you going to stay put?
Yeah, so I'm based in Washington, D.C., which is probably why you don't see me at a lot of these birthdays unless I'm on a panel or something, and I'm very much a hermit. Probably because I spend so much of my time on the road. I do about 40 to 50 events a semester, mostly because I do school and university. So I'm doing about 100 events a year, which means that I'm constantly flying all over. So when I'm home, it's like, you don't see me on social media, you don't see me on anything. It's like I'm shut down watching Netflix.
All right, well, we want to jump in. We have a lot of questions for you, and then I'm sure the audience is going to have some pretty awesome questions for you as well. So let's get this Christmas gift started, because it's such a gift to be here with all of you guys and you. All right, so my first question is, how and when did you know you wanted to become a storyteller?
This is a question I get often, right? The origin story. And I think that the origin story changes according to like where you want to pinpoint. I come from people who weren't necessarily the most literate folks. I'm thinking of my grandfather, who had a third grade education, but who would memorize these riddles, right, that he would recite for 15, 20 minutes. And so I had this idea of like, what does it mean to tell a story? What does it mean to set up a story so that you have a turn and a twist? And as a kid, you don't know that, right? You're just delighted by the fact that like this guy knows so many words and can recite them over and over, right? My mother would tell me all these, I thought of them as fairy tales, right? They were folk tales. Because Campesina, she's from Bonao, she was right outside of Bonao, she was raised in Cotuí as well, like she was all over because her father was he drove oxen, right? So she grew up following him as he like farmed for other people. And so she would tell me about La Ciguapa, she would tell me about Luende, she would tell me all these stories that felt so fantastical. And so when I was little, I just thought that that was the way that stories were told. You memorized, you recited, you passed down things, especially for someone who had no memories of the Dominican Republic. I didn't go until I was 8, but I had all of these ideas of my mother's memories, right? Of this is where I'm from. There's a rootedness in the people, in my family, of who we are. And I think that the stories came from them wanting to translate it. Because I've always been more proficient in English, at least when I started going to school. And so while there were certain things she would tell me, and of course I understood, but then there was, well, how do I tell it to other people? How do I say it to my friends? How do I say it to, folks who don't speak this, who may not understand it? So I think the storytelling and impetus came from, I want folks to understand who I am. And in order to do that, I have to learn how to translate myself. And I have to learn how to translate the history and the lineage of where I come from. But it was really hip-hop. When I was 8, I was like, I'll be a rapper. And it's easy. My mom also wanted me to be famous, so she was having acting classes, right? It was all these things. So I was like, or I could be a rapper. Like 9 years old, rapping to Big Pun, and my mom was like, what is happening? But it was, for me, it felt like the same thing. Here's a traditional oral storytelling where you talk to people who look like you, who come from your space, and you tell them where you're from. Right? That felt supernatural. Not supernatural, but super.
So you're talking about rapping. So I want to put you on the spot and ask you, who are your favorite top 5 rappers? And if you had to do karaoke, which is your go-to rap song that you had to go and spit?
Okay, so can also the top would be Eve. Love is Blind was like the first song that I like downloaded.
Yes.
It was like, I'm gonna learn the lyrics. I can sing along to 106 in Park. And so Love is Blind, at the drop of a dime, I could do that song. And I would say that Eve was also one of the first women rappers of the generation that I was coming up in. Right? We had Vox, we had Lil Kim, but that was still slightly older than when I was coming into music. But Eve was like at the forefront of this like dope woman who's talking about really important issues, everything from what it means to be a sex worker, what does it mean to like to own your body, to create boundaries, but also is a really great lyricist. And so Eve felt like she was paving the way, right? And then Lauryn Hill was someone who I got put on, so like she opened the door for me to learn about all these other folks. But I would say Eve, Tupac, Nas, Pun. Oh God, I feel so like you're really committing here. No, all time? No, my five.
You're five.
You know, I just wasn't raised on a lot of things.
Fabulous.
She is a fantastic MC. If we're doing my top five, like who influenced over here? Oh, Cardi. Which I don't think was foundational when I was growing up, but in terms of what it feels like to look at television and be like, oh, I know her. Like that felt really powerful to see someone who felt like she was of us and is now global. But to still be like, but she's not really yours, like, she's really mine. Right? I don't think I ever felt that until Cardi. Like that ownership of she's ours, though. You know?
Yeah.
Okay, Elizabeth, you have 2 published novels out there right now, third in the works, coming in May, right?
Yeah. The title of the book is Clap When You Land.
Well, I'm going to ask you a what may seem like a basic question. How do you write a book? Like, do you go do you have a chisel and a rock? Do you have an old school typewriter? Do you use Microsoft Word? Do you use iPhone Notes? Or like, do you freestyle? Like, how does Elizabeth write a freaking book? Google Docs.
My process is very much according to when I have time to sit. I can revise on the road, I can edit on the road, because that's a different brain, right? That's looking at something and just like cleaning it up. That's making it better. To be creative, I can't have a lot of voices in my head. So like, it would be hard for me to do this event, talk with you all, talk about myself for half an hour, have you ask questions, and then go home and be like, let me come up with a whole new scenario. I've just sat with too many other folks and like their energy and with myself to be able to leave that. So I can only write when I'm on break, which means that I write in the summer, because that's when I have the longest period of time to drop. But what that also means is that I have exactly 3 months to write a project, right? Because there's no room. Otherwise, it's going to have to wait an entire year. So I can write quickly, but it's partly under duress. Right? Okay. But also, a lot of folks don't know that a lot of these projects were done long before my first book was published, right? It's easy when you show up one day and you have book after book after book. You're like, she's so fast, she's so prolific, she's this, that, and the third. I'm like, no, I've been actively writing since 2012. I was in grad school, I was a teacher, and I wrote every day. I would write on the train, in my notes app, I would write in my little notebooks for prep. I was like thinking of characters, I'd be on the treadmill, and I'm thinking of problems. Like, I was working for a long time before the book came out. And so when they were like, all right, what do you have next? I'm like, man, I got things. So it's not that it's fast, it's that it was quiet and diligent for a long time before the first thing got picked up.
So do you have space and time to kind of create new stuff that obviously won't come out in the near future, but where does that come from? Where's the source of inspiration? And again, like if you're gonna have some material, like what do? Like you write some part and put it to the side for a couple of years?
The source? I feel like this is like the question you gotta ask your priest. Like, I don't know. The source? No, I think it really is. I think creativity is a channeling of something that I don't know what that is. Right? Like the reason that I begin the question of what is your origin, what am I, who I come from, is because like there's a source of what does it mean to be a child, and the things you hear, and the language you hear, and to be inspired by that. And I think that's what writers feel. It's like you see a story in anything. I was getting my nails and I had been on the road for a while. The manicurist is holding my hand. I was lonely, right? Because I hadn't seen someone who I knew. She's making me pretty. She's massaging. I got lotion. I'm like, you love me.
She gave me a hot towel.
love, write about revolution, write about being human in a way that folks can identify, but maybe in an image that they have never thought of. It's like, oh, that's the perfect image for loneliness. Even as you're being held, you feel like you're unloved, right? Like it's finding those things, and I don't presume to believe that that's something that like is original to me. I think that there is a challenge. I think there's a connection with like ancestors. I think there's a connection with community. It's a loop. I'll read poems or I'll read books by other people, and I'm like, I don't know how we wrote this independently because they're literally talking to each other. But this is someone I've never met, and there has to be something greater at play there for so many people to be in accord. You know what I mean? And so I can't name that. I don't know what that is. I think writers spend their whole lives trying to figure it out. What I know is that for a long time I used to fear there was magic in writing and it would be taken from me. Right? If I gotta get everything out now because one day I might not be inspired. And I think that can be great when you're young because it makes you work. But I think it makes you fearful of the thing that you should love. And the thing that honestly loves you back. Because it shows up for you. Right? And so what I try to think of now is just the generosity of like there's clarity and there's something that I need to be saying. And I trust that as long as I'm here, that will keep showing up. And if it doesn't, then I said what I needed to say.
Speaking of the things that you need to say, I recently watched your interview of Julia Alvarez at the CUNY Graduate Center while I was wrapping Christmas presents. It was like the best activity. I highly suggested. First of all, I have 2 kids. I can't believe how many freaking gifts there are in my apartment. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. So it was very pleasurable listening to this interview, and you brought something up. Well, you brought several topics up that I thought were fascinating. But one of the things that you talked about is literary multiculturalism. And my question to you is, do you think there are enough of these stories being told? Do you think it's a field that, really, is there a call to arms right now for writers to really shout our stories? Where are we at?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. Did you catch the pessimist today or the optimist? What this is?
Who is next to me right now? Is the glass half full or it's half empty?
Oh no, there's no water in this cup, guys. No, I think that we're in an amazing moment, right? Where the literary landscape has been revolutionized in terms of self-publishing, which I think allowed a lot of marginalized writers who usually would not get their stories out into the world to be able to say, if big publishing, if big publicists, if this editor don't want my work, I can still figure out a way, right? Like the Dominican Writers Association has been doing so much work in supporting writers who for a long time are able to get their books picked up. I think there are more agents, more editors, more people of color in publishing who are able to open the doors. I don't know that I will, in my lifetime, be in a moment where I'm like, oh, you know what, we have enough, we're good now. It feels like an impossibility because for my whole life I have been so hungry for stories that resonated, right? That felt like me. And I probably because I don't read in Spanish, and so it's like there was a disconnect between Dominican literature that I had access to that I could read. So it was a very limited number of people who I was working with, who I could understand at that level. And what we're seeing right now is there are more writers coming through, but I don't know that as a reader I'll ever be able to read enough. Like when you live your whole life hungry to see images of yourself, you can walk through as many galleries as you want, you're still going to want to see more. Because for 31 years, there was no story like mine that existed in the world. And I think we're seeing it. We're literally in a salon full of people who showed up on a Sunday before Christmas. And I think it's because people resonated with a story that maybe they hadn't seen before, right? It astounds me, but it also is just such a reminder of like, this is the work. When I said next to Julia, I was shaking, right? Like I was like trembling because this is my idol. This was the writer. That's it. That's it. Her books were the only ones growing up on any bookshelf or who were given any merit by any type of school setting. And so it's like, how do you go from that? You should give me 300, 500, 1,000 writers, and I'm still going to see more. And what I will say is that we also just need more writers because we can't have a single story, right? And that's Chimamanda Adichie's incredible theory of, or not incredible theory, but she named it, where I don't want my book, The Poet X, to be the one depiction that young women have of this is a young Dominicana. That is a very particular kind of story with a very particular family dynamic. And if people are reading that and be like, oh, Dominicans, like, that's a problem. So we need other coming of age stories. We need other stories so that people can say, oh, look at the diversity within communities that we think are monolithic. Because we're not. And I know there are people that don't mess with my books because they're like, well, actually my experience was this. And I'm like, that's dope. Like, I can't wait till the day when you could pick and choose, like, oh, I love all these books, but this one was really neat. And I hope we get there.
My question to you for now that we're in 2019, 2020, social media is such an influence as far as being able to talk to your fans, people that read your stuff. Can you tell me some pros and cons of how social media has worked for you?
I mean, I think the pros are it connected me to folks who, it can be easy to feel like you're the only person of your kind of experience, particularly if you are progressive or radical or an artist in a community where your immigrant parents came and are like, you need to be an engineer, you need to send money back, you need to do this, right? And so I think social media was like, oh, a lot of us exist, right? And I'm not that special, like I'm no snowflake, right? I'm actually behind the curve or something. I remember when I saw Miss Lisa, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? Like, she's been out here doing this for years talking about natural hair, and we've been doing it in our own lanes. So I think that realization that what you're doing, someone else is doing in a completely different city, but in the same vein, that connection is dope, right? When I get little like messages from 12-year-olds who are like, I read your book, I loved it, can you send my class a video? And I'm like, oh my God, bless your heart. That's so sweet. So I love that. I think the same walls that it breaks though can be a lot. Like people have an access to you that they feel entitled to have. And that is so strange to me. And sometimes I feel very old school. Because I'm like, you got an email. You know what I mean? Like, that's a business inquiry. Like, you got an email. Like, you got to book me. You know, like, and then I feel bad because I'm like, oh, maybe they don't know that. I'm like, no, but they should know better. Am I just old? It feels old, right? But I think for me, there are protocols that I was taught to follow. Like, this is how you write a letterhead. This is how you approach people when you do something. This is how you write a proposal. So when people are like DMing me and it's like, can you give me 10 pieces of advice on how to be a better writer? You gotta pay for the master class. I'm trying to eat. You come from places where you're like, yo, but I remember having questions and not knowing where to go. Wow. I don't know if I would have written like my favorite writer with those questions. But then I appreciate the assumption because I'm like, oh, that's a lot of bravado I did not have. Right? But it's also like, what does it mean to say, well, one, I want people to be able to do research. And that's the teacher in me that's like, you could Google this. I've answered this 10 times, you could Google that. But the person in me that also recognizes like, yo, there's a connection that they feel and you have the answers. And it was because of what I read that the questions even came up. And so you're the source of the answer and the question. So I have to come to you. And I know what it feels like to have that hunger of, I want to do this thing that you showed me I could do. Mm-hmm. Can you like just show me the path? Right. And the hardest thing is telling someone like, yo, there's no blueprint. Mm-hmm. There's no blueprint. I can't pass you the map. Like there's nothing I can do outside of telling you like my process looks like this. Your process should look completely different because I haven't walked in the shoes that you walked in. But I don't say that over DMs. Like people email me, all emails get response, even if it's someone else responding. But I try to keep certain things private, and social media, one of the cons is it's really hard to keep those boundaries.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question. But I wanted to comment on what you're saying because I think there's a parallel in the podcast space. Because we're out there doing something that not many Latinos are doing. We're sketch comedians doing podcasts, moving Latinos forward while making them laugh. And these listeners are listening to every single word we're saying. So much so that they hit us up in the DM and it's like, Rachel, how's your son feeling? Did he get over this? Oh, yeah, said it on my next episode. It's like, are they stalking me? Yeah. I'm like, thank you. That was a lot. But please, mind your own business. No, just kidding. It's beautiful and it's wonderful. Let's go back to the segue. So I know you get the emails, the DMs. I would like to know if there was ever one that really stuck out in your mind. Like, is there one that you received that you just, like, llorona, like you just started crying, or like maybe a special note that took you to an emotional place, does something stick out in your mind that you've received from a family?
I think the one thing that constantly hits home, and sometimes it's via email, sometimes it's someone will say it to me. I was actually doing an event at Horace Mann, and one of the teachers came up to me. She's like, my mother is also a teacher, and she's driving from Connecticut to be here. She's Dominican. And she's like, I read your book, and I immediately bought it for her so she could read it. Because there was so much that we never talked about that I knew we needed to talk about, but we needed a place to start from, and the book was that for me. And so then her mother came down and watched my event at this really prestigious school. I've never even been to Riverdale. Is that what that is? I thought it was also like the New York City Public.
It's still the Bronx.
Guess what? It's still the Bronx.
It's still the Bronx.
Come on, it's the Bronx.
It's the gentrified part of the Bronx.
I didn't see the PS, but some of these schools are getting really fancy. They just got names. So I was like, okay, cool. And it kind of rang a bell, but I haven't been in high school so long. I just didn't have it top of mind. So the mom pulls me aside, and she was, una doña, right? The daughter was my age at that point. And she's like, I read your book and immediately apologized to my daughter. Because there was so much, I was so afraid when I was raising her. There was so much I couldn't see, and reading your book, it echoed so much what she was trying to say. And when that happens, I'm always just completely taken aback. Or when mother-daughters comes to the events and it's like we read your book together. Because there is something about that intergenerational connection that, like, I remember going to 14th Street, which had one of the few bilingual books, 14th Street and Dyckman had one, and buying Julia Alvarez in the name of Salome in English for myself and in Spanish for my mom, because I wanted to have at least one piece of literature we had both read that we could talk about. Because I was a big bookworm, but there were a few books that we could connect on. And so to see that for me is just like, that is the point of storytelling. Like, that is what it does. It brings together these moments of from top to bottom, but then also how do we talk and how do we give language to the things that wound us that maybe we could never say. But now we have a text that we could return to like help us break that apart. And that feels like such a gift when people tell me that my work was able to do that.
So you have 2 published books, and you have one coming out next year. Can you give our audience here a little preview on the 3rd book is about?
Yes. Clap When You Land is loosely based on a flight that crashed in New York City in 2001. I give this spiel often, and people in the audience are like, tell me more. And of course, you all are like, yeah, girl, we know, right? and that's the point, right? So 2001, 2 months after 9/11, a plane falls on its way to Santo Domingo, and it falls in Queens, right? It kills close to 300 people, many of whom were Dominican nationals, including 5 people on the ground. Neighbors, I remember the neighbor next door, my classmates' parents, right, the barber, like all these people in the community who were on that flight. And it rocked us. I was young, right? I was probably like 12, 13. But I remember my father looking at the newspaper every day and had the television on and just like wanting to know like what happened. And initially it was like, was it another terrorist attack? Right? And then when they realized, oh no, it was just engine failure and pilot and mechanical, it was like forgotten off the news, right? But not for us. Not for us. Like I just remember my neighbors. I remember the vigils outside of the doorways. I remember how long the candles were there. I remember seeing these kids that I knew and their dad that I knew and how their life changed. And so I've always came back to that. And I've loved the tradition of when your plane lands, you clap. Right? Which these days, less and less, depending on where
Sometimes you're the only one, and you're like,
It's such a beautiful thing. And so I've always wanted to kind of talk about this story. And Clap When You Land is set now, so it's not that time period, but it's about 2 sisters, one in the Dominican Republic, one in New York City, whose father had a secret family. And he dies in a plane crash, and one of them inherits money, right? Which was very true. People received grievance paid before they were able to do lawsuits in the hope that they wouldn't sue. And so it's very common that airlines will give you money in advance, hoping that you just won't get a lawyer, right? And so one of them receives grievance paid, and the other sister then learns, like, wait, wasn't I supposed to get something? but they don't know about it. And so the sisters learn about each other, and it's touching on a lot of things. I think this is probably one of my most ambitious novels, which is why it's taken such a long time to come full scope, because it is talking on what is sex tourism, like how do we talk about that in the Dominican Republic, how do we talk about families that are complicated, how we talk about parents that are not perfect, that are not heroes, but also redeem them because our parents are human, right? And how do you give humanity to all of these aspects? And so one sister is frantically trying to get to the U.S. to try to further the circumstances of how they left her in, and the sister in New York is trying to accompany her friends to fly out. So it's like they're racing towards each other.
What were some of the things you had to research for this novel? Like, did you listen to black box recordings? Were you on the ground directing planes? Like, were you edited? Like, what were some
I'm
of the
always
things?
so scared that the FBI is going to show up one day. You ain't got to talk about your searches. I'm like embalming fluid. How long does a body last in the ocean before it deteriorates? How long does it take for that kind of investigation to happen? How do you claim remains? Right? Like, in deadly crash, like, there are literally people who make their life off of going into, like, deadly crash zone and just identifying every single hair, every single thing they can so that they can return something to families. Right? And so just going down that path, but then also the legalities of it. What is grievance pay? How do lawyers work? Can you get money far in advance? What does that look like? How do you inherit money? How do you inherit money when someone was in a bigamous relationship? What does that look like? So my searches for a young adult novel, right, were wild.
Did you have to call Trollman Glazer Elite Man? That would be in my case too.
That's like funny, well not funny enough, but like 587 was the second deadliest crash in U.S. history. And so there are actually several documentaries about that crash. So I did watch a lot of the research around that, and a lot of research.
It sounds like not so much fun, but fun.
No, it's fascinating. So if you go down a rabbit hole, you're like, wait, I've never put an embalming fluid in a book, but now I know a lot about how to embalm body.
I'm curious about it only because, I don't know, I also found this really weird FAA.gov wormhole that I went in one night, and I just started reading black box recording, like, idiot. I don't know why. I was not in a dark place, but it's really interesting because all this information is public. But I cannot wait for your book to come out. Okay, Elizabeth, our podcast, our audience often is comprised of aspiring writers, entertainers, seeking advice. They want to move forward. Something we hear oftentimes from our listeners is that they hear about career paths that they are not really subjected to in, let's say, the public school system in their lower household income area of Southern Bronx or East LA. So we like to provide our listeners with, those nuggets, the advice nuggets. Specifically, if you were talking to this pool of Latinas, young Latinas, aspiring writers, what are some nuggets that you would share with them right now? They're listening.
I think I would start with, I get a lot of emails requesting mentorship, and I hope that more people realize that there's a lot that can be learned cross peer. Like people who email me and don't know me, I'm like, you don't want my feedback. Because how do you trust me with your work? You don't know how tender I'm going to be. You don't know if I'm going to understand what the context is. Like, I may come in and the kind of style that you need to receive feedback, and I'm over here with red pen, and you're like, well, I'm not a writer. Or I may come in and I'm super gentle, and all I do is ask questions, and you're like, well, that was a waste of time. Because we have not created a rapport for me to know, like, okay, as a writer, here's how I nurture your craft. Which is something that I can do if I'm giving a class, if I'm working with someone long term, right? There has to be a relationship. So what I hope folks will do, and I found really useful, I didn't have mentors for a long time, but I had a really strong peer group. And we were constantly reading our work, and we were constantly trying to one-up each other. You wrote that, was dope. I'm going to go read it like exercise, I'm going to steal, I'm going to do this. And then we show it to each other, we work on it, and we move forward. And that's still the peer group that I show my work to now. right? And it's been like 10 years. And so it's just my writers group, when you have a writers group, came from other poets who were also slamming, who would send me poems, and I would look at them, and I would send them poems, and we compete with them, and be like, that was good feedback, because that poem did well, right? And so that it can start laterally. I think people want to know, like, what's that next step? And that can be really important to have a mentor, but I think it's also, what's your peer group look like? Who do you know that you can trust work, and who's in the same place? Because that means that their investment in your work is going to be equal, right? Like, I could be like, yeah, I'm going to look at this, I'll get back to you in 4 months. Right? Because I'm still doing my own thing. I'm going to get to this when I get to this versus someone who's like, wait, I want my feedback on my stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and be quick. You know, like there's a different capacity to grow together there that I think that people don't give enough credence to. And that could be easy. That could be putting it on social media and y'all just trying to keep up with someone once a month and like go over poems. Right? That could be, I'm trying to sign up for a class, but I'm nervous to do it by myself. Anybody want to join in and do like a community workshop? Like that, it can be a lot of different ways that looks like. But I think that writers groups can be incredibly helpful. I would say stop looking for permission, which I feel like is the number one thing people want me to tell them. No, you're a real writer. Like if you wake up and you work with language and you think about story, you obsess with story, and when you read a book, you're literally thinking, how did this person do this? I would have done this differently. Man, my character would have. You're already a writer. Like stop looking for any gateway, any medal, any award, any publication to tell you otherwise. You could never show that to anyone in the world, and you're still already a writer. And I think folks need to remember that. And also, my last little nugget, keep them coming. This is free, people.
And you don't have to DM. You're finding out right now.
Don't DM, because you're not going to get an answer.
Ooh, okay.
We're not doing. My last thing would just be that I think that sometimes writers think they have to put everything out. It's okay to be patient. I've had a poetry collection I've been working on since 2014. And it's come this close to publishing and I pulled it back because it wasn't ready. And I just wish most folks would realize, like, if it's not ready, it's not ready. It doesn't matter how fast people are doing things. It doesn't matter if this poet has 10,000 likes for every single poetry post they put up. Like, if your stuff isn't ready, there's no reason to rush. The work can wait. You know what I mean? Like, you have to make sure that it's meeting the standard that you want it to meet. And I feel like some folks put things out and like, oh, I wasn't proud of that, I didn't feel good about that. Like, why do you rush yourself to do that? I have so many poems that will never see the light of the world. They weren't meant for anybody. They were just for me. And I think that distinction of, okay, this has a merit to be understood and has the clarity for an audience to get it versus this was me and my therapy and my catharsis that I don't have to invite anyone to. And those are different things. They're different projects inherently of what they're connecting to, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, though.
Yes, no, it's great. The silence is awe, Elizabeth. I'm sorry to tell you. The silence is, we want to hear every word she's saying. I want to hear her breathe. Before we segue into the next question, okay, now is the time to hit us up in the DM. We are Latinos Out Loud if you have a question for Elizabeth. So the way it will work is silently type a question. You know, we're going to carry on with the interview.
It's so like classiest, we're going to make sure to like curate these. Y'all are cute.
It's like welcome to Sotheby's. We're going to be auctioning off the opportunity to ask. Silent auction to ask Elizabeth Acevedo a question. So just hit us up in the DM. We're Latinos Out Loud. We're not going to grade you on spelling, although she went. She's a teacher.
I'm not even looking. I don't even know what the questions are. I'm not checking
We're going to check the DM and then we'll call on you and I'll rush over to you and give you the microphone and then you can ask the question yourself. Okay? All right, where was I going to go? I totally have a brain fart right there. Oh, no, it's back. So, as sketch writers, I don't know if you can attest to this, Juan Pablo, but we often get stuck. Like, what's the button in the sketch? How are we going to end it? Is it going to be funny? Is it going to be a blackout? Is it going to be a dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun? Hey! You know, like, how many times do you end a sketch like that? What do you do when you feel that block, or do you not feel the block?
I am not a linear writer, which helps a lot with the block. So I may approach a point in the story and I don't know where to go. I don't know the answer. how am I going to fix this? If you read The Poet X, I thought that novel was going to end halfway through. The ending point I had in my head was Yolanda kisses the boy on the train, she gets caught, and then quickly we're going to be done with this story, right? Because there's nowhere to go from there. And as I was writing, I realized, oh no, there's more writing, but I don't know what that is. And so because I kind of just jump around to the most exciting thing, I was like, well, I don't know, I'm going to throw her in a slime and let's see how that works. And well, what about these other things? So I'm quick to just write different things that may or may not work, but at least get me in the character's head and get me moving and creating stories. So that I may not be solving this problem, but by figuring out who this character is and where they end up, it gives me more information when I come back to the problem, right? But it also just keeps me writing. That oftentimes that block is just a fear of, am I making the right choice? I have a lot of choices of what could happen. And I'm an incredibly indecisive person, so writing is hard because I'm like, well, she could make out with him and not get caught. She could make out with him and get caught by her dad. Or what if her mom tells you? And I try to let her, there's all these options. What if it's not the perfect option for the story? And that's a lot of pressure to put on something. So writing different things that still excite me, but also get me closer to, this character would make a very specific choice because of the lifestyle, the ways that she's raised. If I can just figure out who she is, she's going to tell me what the choice has to be. And I get as close to character. I'm not a plot-driven writer. If you come to my books and you're like, oh, there's going to be an exciting twist, oh, baby, no. There are writers who do that well. I'm like, you want to show up and know about girls' feelings? I got you, right? That's my bag. And so I just get close to the character and let them tell me. But I don't believe in writer's block, and that helps. I fundamentally do not believe it exists. And if I don't believe in it, it can't show up, right? Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, this is the time of the talk back. We're going to be reading some part from your book. So you guys be intro what part it is and what book. And stay a minute.
I'm actually going to read from Beast Girl, which is the first collection of poetry. And I'll read 2 poems. Mommy came to this country as a nanny. And around the same time, she tells me I can't walk the house wearing only panties anymore. She teaches me how to hand wash them in the sink. Put soap on the crotch, folds the fabric on itself, holds me how knuckles against hands make the seemingly most dirty a clean thing again. Nothing ever made me more woman in mommy's eyes than this learning how to wash my own ass. This turning of the shower rod into a garden of intimates. It's this memory that tightens my fist that first week of freshman year when Katie Kerr's mother, who has a throat made for real pearls, points her unsoftened mouth at me and says, "You better take care of Katie. She's always had help." And I have to blink and blink and blink and leave unmentioned all the ways my hands have learned to care for things like her. And Caitlin Kerr's mother really did say that to me. I also didn't know that you weren't supposed to hand wash your panties in college.
How else is supposed to wash them?
That's what I'm saying.
Throw them in the wash with everybody else? No.
What about your romantic boyfriend? So I'm not chill over here by the panties.
Dominican superstitions. For sleeping, don't fall asleep with your knees up, or you'll invite a ghost to mount you.
What?
For ghosts, never ask them what they want. That's some American shit. For ghosts that won't leave, use frankincense, conduct a rosary circle, lead them to a tree that guards gold. For nightmares, upon waking, speak your dreams into the air. The witnessing daylight will prevent them from coming true. For nightmares in which teeth crumble like aged cassava, someone you love has died. the teeth always know. For menstrual period, don't touch any child not your own, and don't wash your hair until you bled for 5 days. For the evil eye, cross yourself and stay away from folks who would give a compliment but do not follow it with a blessing. For kitchens, open an oven or open a refrigerator, but heat and cold air should never tangle in the same body. For men, feed them well and feed them often. The fatter the man, the more likely he's too heavy to leave. Watch out if you skip a hoop while fastening your belt, because one too many times means someone else has been minding your man. For superstitions, treat them like salt, scatter them before you leave, and let them impale themselves into the soles of your feet. I once broke up with a boy in middle school because I skipped a belt hoop. I was like, he's out here. Rachel. I don't even know what that is. Y'all heard that growing up? You can't skip a belt hoop? You were cheated on? All the women in the room were like,
Does anybody have another one? What's another, what do you call these, like folkloric?
Superstitions.
Yeah, superstitions. Anybody?
The don't wash.
Don't buy a man's sneakers.
Yes.
Don't buy your man's shoes.
What?
They wear them to walk away with another woman.
Did she say the Clorox for menstruation one?
When you can't hold another baby.
Yeah. Or don't wash with Clorox if you have your period.
I haven't heard that one.
My mom used to say that.
Que no arregle la cama con tu pareja.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was happening in junior high school. I put him favors. That's why he walked. Okay, so do you have something else to read, or should we get to a question?
Let's do some questions.
Okay, cool. All right. This first question is Chastity Caprice. Where you at? Okay.
Okay, so in the book Fire on High, Amani, she's Puerto Rican or half Puerto Rican, right? So with you as a Dominican, how do you connect with Amani, with her being Puerto Rican?
So this project was really interesting. With the Fire on High was written in 2013 during National Novel Writing Month. And I was in grad school working on poetry. So I was working on my thesis. I wasn't supposed to be doing anything with fiction, and I hadn't really worked with prose. And I decided to take on a project. I love Chopped. I was watching the Food Network channel, the teen competition. I had formerly been an 8th grade teacher, so I'm looking at this competition. I'm like, there are so many young women who I know who would kill on the show, right? Who are literally playing Chopped at home every day. And what would it mean for that young person to be a protagonist? And I'm always mindful of, like, who are the protagonists that we don't anticipate to be the ones who save themselves? And single mothers are one that it's a very easy, right way to go. So I already had all of that. But I also knew I didn't want it to be based in New York. There's just a lot of stories about New Yorkers. So I wanted to find a different city. And Philadelphia is a city that has a lot of technical high schools. It has maintained a lot of technical high schools. It would be a spot where you could base a character who's taking culinary arts classes, right? It's also a city that has a big Latinx population. That population historically has been Puerto Rican. And I wanted to pay homage to that city and to that community, right? And to, like, what does it mean to come from that place and to have built that place? My mother, when she first moved here, moved to Puerto Rico. She worked in Puerto Rico for 3 years. A lot of the things that she cooks, because she did work as a nanny, but as a nanny who basically cooked and cleaned and took care of the kids, were Puerto Rican dishes, right? And so, book about food, to think about, like, what were the dishes that I came up eating, and she would kill me. She'd be like, no, it's Dominicano. I just like all it, whatever you call it, so that doesn't become too, but she's influenced by that. And our islands, have influenced each other historically, right? So it was really those bases. I had worked in Philadelphia. I had taught seniors in high school, many of whom were Puerto Rican. So it was that connection, but there was a lot of research. I had to get beta readers who were Puerto Rican beta readers. Like, I didn't take for granted that there was a lot I don't know, right? This is not my ethnicity. This is not the culture I grew up in. There's still slight differences, or not slight. There are differences, and so I did a good amount of work. I think what I would be curious to do if I were to rewrite it. This is the plight of the writer, right? You're like, if I were to write it now, I would be so curious about the Dominicans who moved to Puerto Rico and raised their children there. right? What would it mean if Imani's father was actually Dominican ancestry? What is your island identity if it's split in that way? And so that would be something I might play with now, but I really just wanted to be honest and truthful to the community I was writing about.
Okay, does anybody in the audience have a question? Because you're a little lazy with the DMs. Old school, and I'll come, I don't see any of the DMs.
There's another one. Yeah, check. There's another one.
Oh, okay. We have some on ours, Rachel.
We got one.
Okay.
So, the writer's block. Who's the writer's block? Are you here? Hey, girls! What's your name?
I went to one of your events, and I personally felt like I knew the audiences, they were all white, and it just felt a little awkward for me. So have you ever been in front of an audience that you felt you couldn't relate to and kind of push through whatever you were talking about?
All the time. This is like a blessing. I'm very rarely doing events in New York. And so everywhere from Kansas to Idaho to Alaska, they've never even seen a Dominican. They've never heard of the term Afro-Latinidad here. I may be the first person of color who's ever spoken out loud in front of these audiences. And I don't change what I say or how I say things. And so it's for many folks is that we've never even met an East Coast person. Like the levels of what we think like identity comes down to is like it can be so massive in terms of just like I don't even know what this is, like farm country Kansas, where they're like, well, like the world that we know is very specific. And so it can be hard because I think I come in fearfully, right? Like how are they going to push back? How are they going to question whether or not my story is true? And not the story in the book, but the story that I tell when I'm presenting. And I have to fall back on like storytelling and this connection is the original art form that connected humans, that created community, right? Before you were nomads, before you finally gathered together, it was this connection of language that can bring us home. And the truth deserves to be told, whether or not I'm in an audience where I'm really afraid because it's an all-boys school in wherever, right? Which is like the epitome of like young white men scare me the most out of anyone when I'm doing a presentation. Because the level of what that antagonism could look like is so scary. And because I know that I'm pushing and talking about race and gender the way that I do in immigrant issues and LGBTQ and all of my books which touch on these things, I know it can be fraught. And just still feels critical, maybe especially because of that. Especially because they may never see someone doing that again. Especially because they may not have been challenged in that way. Or may have wanted to challenge but have never had someone tell them like, yo, that thing you feel when you want to push back because something doesn't feel right, like that's okay to feel. That's okay to say, like, I need you to go home and push back. So I just try to remind myself of like these bigger things that can take me out of my own anxiousness, but it's not easy, right? And one of the publishing things with book things is that it's very white. And I try to be so intentional about ensuring that my events don't look like that. There are a lot of writers who can't launch a book in New York because they won't have people come out, right? And oftentimes when people do come out, it's the same demographic of white folks who have always come out, who are tapped into literary circles. But it's why I've always partnered with the Dominican Writers Association when I do events in New York. In DC, I partner with Mahogany Books, which is Black owned, or with East City Books, which is woman owned. Like, I try to be particular about where we hold books. I've never had a launch that wasn't up of 116th Street, right? And really, honestly, 165th was my first book launch. So I launched in the communities that I want to be reading my work. And that feels, like a way to kind of carve that. But no, it's scary as shit. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, why do y'all bring me here? And like, I have not one kid who looks like me. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to be mad at a paycheck. But it's hard. It's a different kind of work than when I go to New York or I go to Brooklyn or I go to the Heights. Those are very different challenges.
All right, we have one last question. Ms_femme fatale.
Yeah! Fatal! I'm coming for you!
Hey girl, what's your name?
My name is Marjorie. Hi. So my question is, I read Poetex. So how much of Xiomara's story is part of your own personal story growing up? Because I was like, oh, I know her. I was like, does she have a twin brother? Did she marry this guy? So how much of Xiomara is part of Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would say very few of the actual things that happened to her, like not the plot. As I told you, my mother very much wanted me to be famous. She was at every single one of my poetry signs, like #1 supporter. So that was very different. She never made me kneel on rice. That was actually something that had happened to her. And so there were things that I borrowed, but in very different capacities. I would say the emotional truths of Xiomara are very much my own, right? So growing up and having questions about religion and about Catholicism specifically, and my place in that, when all you see are like these white men saints who, these blue-eyed, I don't know what that is. I don't know how I can relate to that. I also don't know how to relate to the way that gender is being told, where particularly with the way that gender can be constructed in Dominican communities of like, be sexy, be Miss Universe, be beautiful, flaunt to an extent, go to sleep with a belt around your waist so that it gets smaller, put a clip on your nose so para que sea más fina, like all of these things that can be curious about vanity. But then also, close your legs, be good, don't ever cross your legs in church, don't ever, you can't have a boyfriend until you're a PhD, I don't understand what the direction is. Be sexy, know how to dance sexy, know how to do these things, but then it was so confusing. And then growing up where I grew up, where you're getting hollered at all the time, and it's like, oh, but it's only because you're pretty, and I was like, but it doesn't feel good, right? It calls an attention that I don't know how to deal with, because I'm 12 and he's 40. Like, that's dynamic to have, or I'm 12 and now he's mad and he's yelling, or he's following me, or so the poetess Xiomara's questions, the honesty with which she's looking at things and saying, I'm so confused. I felt like I just wanted to capture those questions. No answers, because I don't think there are easy answers. Because that same piropo, you're like, the next time you don't get it, you're like, wait, am I not cute? It's complicated. It's not one easy way. Dancing and learning the sensuality of your body young is actually incredibly beautiful. To at 14, 15, be able to say, I can own this on a floor and be able to move the way I want to, and this is mine, and this music is mine. That was incredible, informative. But it's how do we package that for young people so that there's clarity, right, in the double standards. And so I wanted Xiomara to have that. So I would say that those questions were mine. And I consulted my notebook. So a lot of the poems, or not a lot, but some of the poems for Poetex come directly from my notebook when I was in high school. So I plagiarized myself a little bit. But it felt important to be able to calibrate that voice, because this was for teens, right? This is not an adult novel, and I didn't want it to sound like adult me. I wanted it to still be in line with how a young person would sound. But no, I don't have a twin brother. My mom was not violent in that capacity. My best friend was not the good one. She was not the one who thinking like Santita, right? So a lot of it, the plot is slightly different. I did get caught kissing on the train. I remember that.
That sounds like a juicy story.
One train. I had lied too. That was the thing. I called my boyfriend. I had basketball practice, and then was walking around with my little boyfriend. But I was still raised to be super prim and proper. So I'm like, I can't go to his house, right? He clearly can't come to mine. Riverside Park is overdone, right? And we're not doing that. So I'm like, let's just take the train home together. So we walked for a little bit. We took the one train uptown. And I don't know, I got home and my father's like, so I got home. That verbatim in the Poetex, I had to get off the train to stop early. That's exactly what he said. And they didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. You can't go to Brown University, you're just going there today. No one goes to Brown University. But it was
kids on trains.
Is that what you did when you went away to school?
I kiss boys.
Yeah. Well, we would like to thank Elizabeth Acevedo one time.